So the way that I describe Bitcoin and then a blockchain, two separate things.
Yeah.
One, with Bitcoin, I literally just say you trust an algorithm with everything else in your life, right? For the most part, at some point, you're going to trust an algorithm with your money.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and
you
by
trust
the way,
email, right? You trust the email to go.
Well, and I use Google Maps,
Yeah.
right? You trust it to tell you where you're going.
Yeah.
Like you physically move your body depending on this algorithm. What information you put in. So the books it recommends you, the music it recommends you, all the stuff. You listen to an algorithm.
Yeah.
When you Google things, the algorithm tells you the answer. I mean, like it's pretty crazy how much algorithms drive our, our lives. At some point, you're going to trust an algorithm to just secure your money.
Yeah.
That's it, right?
Yeah.
And so Bitcoin's a great way to do that. When it comes from to a blockchain, what I basically describe is triple entry accounting. Yeah. We have two entry accounting, dual entry accounting today. There's been an invention of a piece of technology that now has created triple entry accounting. Triple entry accounting is really important because you no longer have to trust these centralized authorities. You can trust this triple entry accounting system. Most people are like, oh, triple entry accounting sounds pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't know what I would use it for, but like sounds interesting. And so I think it's, again, just what's the most basic concept?
Yeah.
And, I recently met with a guy who's now, I would consider a friend, this guy, a Bitcoin rabbi, right? So he's a Hasidic Jew who wrote a book, but it's a children's book and it describes the very complex topics around Bitcoin and blockchain for, essentially like a 5-year-old, right? It's kind of a story.
That's perfect.
Meet this person. His name is Satoshi. Nobody really knows anything about Satoshi, right? Blah, blah, whatever. But as I was reading through this book, it hit me like this gentleman understands Bitcoin and blockchain technology better than most because he's had to distill it down to the most simple terminology so that a 5-year-old could understand it.
Isn't that a typical interview question at Google? Can you explain internet to a 5-year-old? Because it shows you how well you understand the concept because if you break it down, so it's a good way to doing that.
Absolutely.
Right?
And so when you go on television or you do podcasts or anything with a public audience, the way I look at it is you're basically talking to 5-year-olds, right? Not because the people on the other end aren't intelligent or sophisticated. It's that you have to relay a very complex topic in the, kind of most simple terms possible.
It's also about being respectful to people because people don't have the time like us to read for many, many hours. Maybe they have children, maybe they have things to do, a life. So, I mean, it's also about respect in my opinion.
Think about it. If let's say that, and I'm not saying this, but some people would say, take 1% of your net worth, right, and put it into Bitcoin, right? So just
some philosophy, right? Hedging for the global.
Yeah, so just 1%. Well, that means that the person should spend 99% of their time focused on other things than Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Right? It's only 1%. So like if their portfolio is a proxy for how they spend their time in terms of thinking on the finance side, this is like the smallest thing, right?
Yeah.
So they need to be very efficient in the use of their time and understanding it because it's only 1% of their time.
Can we go into the rabbit hole? Imagine that we're sitting into the government in Norway who just recently banned the tax that makes it possible to mine and stuff. And because there's some misconceptions out there. So I'll go through some of the most typical. This is like the title in the Norwegian financial papers, basically, right? So this is the narrative. Bitcoin only used by criminal. How do you answer that?
Look, every currency in the world is used by criminals, right? And if you look at something like money laundering, those nefarious actors do not want their transactions to be transparent, right? They want to be able to hide the transactions. A blockchain is a really bad place to try to hide transactions. So, look, it's not lost on me that people are going to use Bitcoin, the US dollar, the yen, or any other currency in the world to money launder or for criminal activity. It just happens to be that structurally, I think that a digital currency actually has a higher probability of deterring those criminal activities than encouraging them.
But let's also add that criminals are very good to finding new technology. So it's not like, of course, when Bitcoin was a new technology, of course criminals would be attracted to it because it's a new playing ground for them. So maybe also they have a point. In the start, criminals are very good to finding opportunities to do bad things. In whatever it is.
Of course. Look, every new technology starts on the fringes of society, right? The internet started with criminals, porn, gambling, all this stuff. And it's because they're constantly having to push the pace of innovation and find new technologies to kind of stay ahead of the law.
Yeah, so not get in jail, basically.
Exactly. And so it is the technology shouldn't get kind of attached to the criminal activity. Actually, from an investor standpoint, there's a lot of investors who say, well, what are the criminals using? What are the, kind of more vice type industries using? Because that technology will eventually permeate into and become pervasive in the rest of society. And so I think we just, again, it's just being rational about how much criminal activity is actually happening. I don't think that it's nearly as much as people think it is.
Exactly. Let's go to the one I find a bit tricky, not sustainable, the electricity argument.
Yep.
A more sophisticated argument.
So look, there's no secret that Bitcoin mining is a large consumer of energy. One, I think that is actually a positive thing, right? That's where the security comes from.
Of course.
So I explained to people, it's the most secure computing network in the world, right? Yeah. It should consume a lot of energy. That's what makes it so secure.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. The second piece is because the cost is the largest input, like we talked about earlier in that business, people are constantly seeking out lower cost energy. Well, where's the lowest cost energy? In renewables. And so I actually would make the argument that I think that Bitcoin mining and other types of mining on the proof of work side are driving the adoption of and pushing the pace of innovation in renewable energy, because people have to go seek out the lowest cost power, and they're putting big dollars behind developing it.
Yeah. But I don't think we can forget that we have an environmental crisis. Mm-hmm. So of course, I totally agree with that argument, but imagine if you meet people who are trying to save the world with energy, because we need a lot more energy. Of course, that person will have a problem with that. Maybe he doesn't understand Bitcoin. Maybe he doesn't understand.
So look, move to Central Washington, the state of Washington in the United States. In Central Washington, there was a massive surplus of hydropower. Right? So what did happen? Bitcoin miners moved in and said, we'll take some of that off your hands, and the reason why it's cheap is because there's a surplus.
Yeah.
So that energy was already not being used, right? If you look in Iceland, for example, the geothermal energy, right? Yeah. If you look at other parts of the world, there's other types of renewable energy.
And in Norway, there are great resources, huge resources.
Of course. And so people are going to either have it sit there as a surplus, it'll expire, right? Because storing energy is really, really difficult. So that's another issue. And if we can monetize it in a way that is not killing the environment, right? It's not like mining is throwing up a bunch of black smoke in factories, right? It's a very different type of consumption of energy that's much cleaner.
And I also think my dream scenario, if I manage to build my data center in northern Norway, would be that we use the heat and provide the heat to houses, because the houses needs to be warm during winter time. So you store that heat, put it down, and takes it to the house. That would be a great scenario.
It would be amazing. Absolutely. I think there's people who have built kind of very small, like they've hacked together systems like that, where they mine in their shed and they've used it to heat their home, that type of stuff. But if you could do it on a large scale, it'd be very, very valuable.
So the last one, can't do transaction in big scale. And I think this is a very huge question, because many have the feeling that Bitcoin, the white paper, is really Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV. So, this is a large question, but you view it as a gold, digital gold, right? So you don't want to buy your coffee with Bitcoin. It's not the purpose for Bitcoin. So is that argument, how do we view that argument that Bitcoin is not a transaction? The transaction is in fintech and Alipay and maybe Facebook now, so it's a big question. But
people have to remember that the fiat system was built the exact same way. We're seeing history, maybe not repeat, but rhyme for sure.
Yeah.
Right? So we had gold. Gold was a currency. Everyone used it. We realized, it's not really that great for transactions. So we created paper claims to the gold, right? Which ended up becoming dollars.
Yeah.
Those dollars eventually, then we built electronic money on top of it, credit, all these things got built on top of gold as a non-scalable use for transactions, as a store of value medium of exchange. And then we kind of built layer 2, layer 3, layer 4 on top of it. The same thing's happening with Bitcoin, right? Yeah. It is the Bitcoin that we talk about today is acting very similar to gold. It's a store of value, right? You can use it for a medium of exchange.
Yep.
It's just not ideal, right?
Yes.
And so but what we're seeing is the early stages of the infrastructure being built for layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, where it will become highly, highly scalable in the future. And when that happens, I think people are going to look back and be like, oh, wow, that was really, really obvious that you had to have the core foundation layer before you could build those other layers on top.
Could you say something thoughtful about Facebook's Calibra? I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because there's so much.
I have no thoughtful thoughts ever.
But is that the killer app that Rubin has been waiting for? The email to the internet? Is Facebook the killer app for crypto?
Bitcoin is the killer app, and it's already bigger than Venmo, Apple Pay, right? PayPal, etc. So it's available in more countries. It's got more on-chain transaction volume than they did annually, right? All this stuff. The thing that I think a bunch of other people are looking for, like those guys, is they want to see the Facebook of the internet, right? They want to see the Google of the internet. What they have to realize is that the Facebook of the internet, it could very easily be the Binances, the Coinbases, the Geminis, the Krakens, the Circles of the world, right? Like that is infrastructure around this application, right? On top of that, the miners. And there's people who've built massive mining businesses, right? Yeah. Those are more applications of the technology. People who are running this stuff, it's like the developer tools, like all this stuff, right? So I think that the framework people are applying where they're saying like, where's the decentralized application that's, the future, like this technology that doesn't matter until we get that. I just tend to think that, yes, like there will probably be decentralized applications in the future. Yeah. We don't get to have those until we get the infrastructure and the foundational protocols correct.
It's also about looking behind the scenes. You see Amazon doing some stuff on Ethereum. You see Microsoft. You see so much things going on in the R&D department, and that's basically where you should be viewing if you want to try to forecast the future, right? But also, in my opinion, if I could bet on one company to be huge, I would bet on Coinbase. Mm-hmm. In my mind, there's no reason why Coinbase can't be the next Google in 5, 10, 15 years.
Look, there's a bunch of companies that are coming out of that space, whether it's Kraken, Gemini, Coinbase, Circle, all of them, right? Even Binance, right? They're all just building a very, very different model. Yeah. And I think that there's going to be companies that end up being worth hundreds of billions, if not over $1 trillion in this industry. And the key is to go and try to find them.
Can you say something about, imagine if someone in Norway that has to work with the regulations and stuff, do you have anything you can say to why we should open up to the mining activity? Is it possible to give an argument for why it's a bad idea to scare these actors away?
Yeah, look, I am on record as saying the countries that use regulation to incentivize entrepreneurs, innovation, economic activity are going to drastically benefit more than the countries that use regulation to repel or disincentivize people from doing that. In this industry, there's a couple of ways that you can benefit from it if you are a nation state. One is you can actually just expose yourself to Bitcoin. So you just buy Bitcoin, put it on your balance sheet. That's pretty good. It's a scarce asset, probably going to be valuable in the future. Two is you can incentivize private companies to move in, or you can incentivize the building of infrastructure. The biggest argument, I think, for a nation state to embrace something like mining is you are simply encouraging your country to have more computing power underneath or within its borders. Some of that computing power can only be used for the Bitcoin blockchain, right? Like the ant miners, etc.
Yeah.
There's other computers like the GPUs, etc., that can be used not only for just mining cryptocurrencies, but certain pieces of technology can actually be used for things like autonomous driving, 3D rendering, DNA sequencing,
Neuralink or Elon Musk's Neuralink probably in the future. Who knows?
It's just computing power, right? So there's GPU, CPU, TPU, right? There's all these different processing units, right, that have been created, and different types of products or companies that need computing power need the different types or variations. And so having a lot of computing power inside your borders is probably going to prove to be a good decision in the future.
Which means that Norway, which has a huge amount of sustainable green energy, that's like having steel. And like you said that analogy.
They should have a huge advantage, right?
Exactly.
If, people always say data's the new oil. Well, then that makes the computing power the steel. Right?
Exactly.
And the country that is the biggest steel producer did all right.
Yeah, definitely. Can we talk a bit about the price? Or let's start with a normal person, let's say between 20, 40 years old, not tech savvy, but likes innovation, likes to save money. Mm-hmm. How much Bitcoin should that person have? Or is it like 1% is fair?
Each person is different, right? Yeah. It's all about the risk profile, your other responsibilities. So it's too hard to kind of make a blanket statement as to one certain percentage. With that said, though, the way that I describe it to folks is it is a non-correlated asymmetric asset, meaning it does not move in lockstep with other assets, either up or down, right?
Yeah.
So the value drivers are different. A stock, for example, is driven by revenue, profits, GDP, interest rates, etc. This asset of Bitcoin is not driven by those same things.
What are they driven by?
Right. Well, it's driven by the fundamentals. It's a network, right? And so the advantage I had early in looking at this stuff is having worked at Facebook, I understand how networks and technology products grow, right? So I always use the example of if you have a mobile app and let's say you run a marketing campaign and you sign up 100 new people, and then there's 30% of them, so 30 people, try out the product. They don't like it right after a week or two and they leave and they don't use it anymore. So they kind of churn out.
Yeah.
Well, you had a net gain of 70 people. Then there's another influx of users. Then there's some of the percentage of those churn out, right? Then you have another acquisition of users. Some of those churn out. But each time you're having a net new gain of users, right? And so over time, the retention ends up being really, really important.
Yeah.
And so the network effect locks people in and retains them.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is experiencing that. That's what these kind of bull and bust cycles look like, right? Or they're acting like, is the same exact way that technology products grow.
But in my mind, the crazy thing with Bitcoin, and I'm guilty of this. People say to me, I have a fair amount of Bitcoin, at least in my net worth, right? And I'm saying to them, I'll never sell. I want to die with the Bitcoin. And I don't know if you're the same, but imagine if you have a system where the people who are in it don't want to sell. And if you add more people into the system, what do you think will happen with the price?
Supply and demand economics are a beautiful thing. And I literally think it's such a simple concept that people
It's too simple, right?
They're confused.
Yeah.
They're like, there's no way that this is possible. What do you mean? How does this work? Blah, blah, blah.
Look at the media, like, oh, there's a trade war. That's why the Bitcoin go. Oh, of course, I'm not saying it's not an important factor. Of course, the more unstable world you have, the more you tend to go to the scarce asset. But still, to my mind, it's a bit too simple to just find something bad going on in the world and say that's the reason why Bitcoin goes up.
Completely agree.
Yeah.